Most people think police encounters are won with clever words. They're not. In real-world traffic stops, the people who escalate situations fastest are often the ones talking the most, trying to explain, trying to debate, trying to sound innocent. But from a legal perspective, roadside encounters are not judged like conversations. They're judged like sequences. Body cam footage gets reviewed frame by frame. Courts analyze timing. Movement matters, silence matters, tone matters. And sometimes the most powerful thing a person says during a police encounter is almost nothing at all, because there is one sentence that changes the structure of the interaction immediately, not emotionally, legally. And today, we're going to break down exactly why that sentence matters and how courts, officers, prosecutors, and body cam reviewers interpret everything that happens after it. Because small moments decide big outcomes. Traffic stops are sequences, not arguments. Here's what most people misunderstand about police encounters. They believe the goal is persuasion. It isn't. The moment emergency lights activate behind your vehicle, the officer begins building a behavioral timeline. How long it took you to stop, whether your hands remain visible, whether you removed your seatbelt too early, whether you turned toward the back seat, whether passengers began moving suddenly. All of it matters. And once the officer reaches your window, the interaction becomes less about words and more about interpretation. This is where things change. Most drivers think officers are focused entirely on what's being said. Experienced officers are often evaluating something else entirely: behavior under stress. From a legal perspective, traffic stops operate through layered standards: reasonable suspicion, investigative detention, probable cause, officer safety analysis. And because those standards are evaluated later by courts, every movement becomes part of the story, not your intention, the observable behavior. That distinction matters enormously. So today, we're going to break down the exact legal rights phrase that often changes encounters, and the 5 critical ways to use it correctly without escalating the situation. Because silence without control can look suspicious, but controlled silence backed by lawful behavior often changes the entire dynamic. Move number 1. The first 10 seconds decide the tone. Before you ever speak, the stop is already being analyzed. This is one of the biggest misconceptions people have. They think the interaction starts when the conversation begins. It doesn't. The interaction starts the moment the officer sees your brake lights. From a body cam and dash cam review perspective, the first 10 seconds often shape officer perception dramatically. Timing matters. Did the driver stop promptly? Did they reach under the seat? Did they begin digging through compartments? Did they lean toward the passenger side? Those details affect the officer's threat assessment before the first word is spoken. And this becomes even more important when you invoke legal rights later in the stop, because officers often interpret behavior clusters, not isolated actions. For example, visible hands plus calm posture plus controlled speech generally creates a predictable interaction. But rapid movement plus nervous explanations plus delayed compliance can increase suspicion quickly. Here's a realistic scenario. An officer initiates a nighttime traffic stop for speeding. Before the officer even exits a patrol car, the driver is seen leaning toward the center console repeatedly. By the time the officer reaches the window, concern levels are already elevated. Now compare that to another stop. Driver pulls over smoothly. Interior light comes on. Hands remain visible on the wheel. Minimal movement. The second encounter immediately feels lower risk from the officer's perspective. That difference affects tone, and tone affects escalation. Here's what most people miss. Officers frequently evaluate whether behavior appears predictable or unpredictable. Predictability lowers tension. Unpredictability raises it. And courts later analyze whether officer reactions were objectively reasonable under those circumstances. That reasonable officer standard appears constantly in police litigation, not what the driver intended, what the officer reasonably perceived. Which brings us to the first critical legal rights mistake people make: talking too much too early. Move number 2, the sentence that changes the encounter. There is one sentence that immediately changes the legal structure of many traffic stops. Not aggressively, not emotionally, calmly. I'm choosing to remain silent. That's it. Simple, clear, controlled. But here's the hidden detail most people never understand. The power is not only in the words, it's in the delivery. Because courts analyze invocation behavior carefully. Tone matters, timing matters, clarity matters. A calm invocation of rights looks very different from a hostile confrontation on body cam footage. And body cam footage becomes a foundation of the narrative later. Here's a common mistake. Drivers try to argue constitutional law roadside. That almost never helps. Instead of invoking rights clearly, they begin debating. I know my rights. You can't do this. This stop is illegal. Now the interaction becomes emotionally charged. And emotionally charged encounters escalate faster. But controlled invocation creates a different atmosphere entirely. Imagine this scenario. Officer asks, "Where are you coming from tonight?" Driver responds calmly, "Officer, I'm choosing to remain silent." No aggression, that no sarcasm, that no sudden movement. From a legal perspective, that clarity matters enormously because courts often analyze whether a person clearly invoked their rights or merely acted evasively. Ambiguity creates problems later. Clear invocation creates structure. Now here's what most people miss. Remaining silent does not mean refusing lawful commands. That distinction is critical. You can comply physically while remaining verbally silent, and courts frequently separate those two issues during legal analysis. This is where many roadside encounters begin escalating unnecessarily. People confuse silence with resistance. Legally, they're not the same thing, and understanding that difference changes everything. Move number 3, compliance versus consent. This is where many drivers unintentionally damage their legal position. They believe compliance automatically means surrender. Not necessarily. From a legal perspective, there's a major difference between complying with lawful commands and voluntarily consenting to expanded investigation. Courts analyze that distinction constantly. For example, an officer ordering you to step out of the vehicle during a lawful stop is often treated differently than an officer asking permission to search your car. Those are separate legal issues. But stress causes people to blend them together emotionally. This is where timing matters. Imagine an officer says, "Step out of the vehicle." Driver immediately responds, "So now I'm under arrest?" Officer says no. Driver refuses to exit. Now the legal focus shifts. The stop is no longer centered primarily on the original traffic issue. Now it includes non-compliance analysis. And from a body cam review perspective, refusal often changes officer perception immediately. Here's the key point. You can comply physically while still preserving legal objections later. Experienced defense attorneys understand this deeply because roadside arguments rarely determine case outcomes. Documentation does. Body cam footage, reports, sequence reconstruction. That's what courts analyze later. Now consider another situation. Officer asks, "Do you mind if I search the vehicle?" The driver calmly says, "I did not consent to searches." Short, clear, professional. No argument. That distinction matters enormously because courts later evaluate whether consent was voluntary, pressured, ambiguous, or withdrawn, and wording matters. But here's the hidden layer. Even if consent is denied, officers may still proceed if they believe they have independent probable cause. That's important to understand. The goal is not to physically stop an officer roadside. The goal is preserving legal clarity, because clarity becomes evidence later, and evidence shapes outcomes. Move number 4. Silence looks different than panic. This is where behavior becomes more important than words. Many people attempt to remain silent, but their physical behavior communicates panic. And officers notice this immediately. Rapid breathing, looking around constantly, shaking hands, sudden posture shifts. Now again, nervousness alone is not proof of criminal activity. Courts recognize this repeatedly, but officers are trained to evaluate clusters of indicators, not isolated behaviors. So silence paired with frantic movement can still elevate suspicion dramatically. This is why controlled body language matters. Hands visible, slow movement, forward-facing posture. Simple things, but legally important things. Here's a realistic scenario. Officer approaches a vehicle and begins questioning. Driver says, "I'm choosing to remain silent." But immediately afterward, the driver begins reaching into pockets repeatedly and twisting around in the seat. From the officer's perspective, silence is no longer the central issue. Movement becomes the issue. And from a use of force analysis perspective, unclear movement patterns frequently justify heightened officer response. Again, courts analyze perception. What would a reasonable officer perceive under those circumstances? That standard appears constantly in litigation. This is why movement control matters more than clever wording. Experienced officers often describe calm individuals as deliberate. Agitated individuals appear reactive, and reactive behavior increases uncertainty. Uncertainty increases escalation risk. That's the practical reality. So the real strategy is not silence alone. It's controlled silence. That combination changes encounters dramatically. If you're finding these breakdowns useful, subscribe to the channel. Not for internet arguments, not for outrage clips, for real-world legal awareness. Because understanding how courts interpret behavior can completely change how people move through police encounters. And most drivers never learn this until after something goes wrong. Now let's continue. Move number 5. Body cam footage changes everything. Modern police encounters are heavily shaped by cameras. And cameras do something important. They freeze behavior permanently. Not perfectly, but permanently. That means every pause, glance, movement, and tone shift becomes reviewable later. Judges watch it. Jurors watch it. Prosecutors study it. Defense attorneys dissect it frame by frame. This changes how encounters should be understood. Because from a courtroom perspective, the footage often becomes a narrative foundation. Here's what most people miss. Body cam footage does not only capture words, it captures emotional pacing. How quickly someone complied, whether commands were interrupted, whether the officer repeated instructions multiple times. Timing becomes evidence. Imagine this scenario. An officer gives repeated instructions. Keep your hands visible. Driver continues reaching toward the center console while verbally insisting, "I know my rights." Now compare that to another driver. Hands visible, minimal movement. Calm tone, clear invocation of silence. Those encounters feel completely different on video, and perception affects legal outcomes. This is why experienced attorneys focus intensely on body cam sequencing, because prosecutors often frame escalation as a response to perceived unpredictability. And courts frequently defer to officers' safety interpretations if they appear objectively reasonable under rapidly evolving circumstances. Again, notice the pattern. Everything comes back to timing and behavior, not dramatic speeches, not internet one-liners. Control, that's what changes encounters. Move number 6. Detention is not the same as arrest. This misunderstanding creates enormous problems during traffic stops. Many people believe, if I'm not under arrest, I can leave. That is legally incorrect during most traffic stops. A lawful traffic stop is generally considered an investigative detention, temporary, limited in scope, but still a detention. And once people misunderstand that framework, escalation begins. Imagine this scenario. Officer says, "Stay in the vehicle." Driver responds, "If I'm not under arrest, I'm leaving." Now the stop changes instantly, not because of the original violation, because the driver misunderstood detention authority. This matters because courts distinguish sharply between temporary detention and formal arrest. And body cam footage often becomes critical in analyzing whether officer force or restraint was legally justified during that transition. Here's the key legal concept. Officers do not need full probable cause to temporarily detain during lawful investigative activity. Reasonable suspicion is often enough for limited detention. That lower threshold surprises many people. Experienced defense attorneys know something important. The roadside is rarely where legal battles are won. Courtrooms matter more than parking lots. Documentation matters more than speeches. And preserving composure often protects legal positions more effectively than confrontation ever will. Move number 7. The real goal is control, not victory. Here's the hidden truth behind almost every police encounter video online. Most people are trying to win emotionally, but from a legal perspective, emotional victory is irrelevant. Control matters more, because the law analyzes sequence, not pride. The question later becomes, what happened? What escalated the encounter? Was officer perception reasonable? Did the subject comply physically? Did movements create uncertainty? That's how courts think, not emotionally, procedurally. This is why the phrase, "I'm choosing to remain silent," works best when paired with something else. Behavioral discipline, not hostility, not sarcasm, not dramatic speeches. Calm posture, visible hands, measured movement. Because here's what most people never realize until after they watch their own body cam footage. Stress changes behavior faster than intention. People think they appear calm, but the footage shows interruption, movement, agitation, escalation. And once prosecutors begin constructing timelines, those small details become enormous. Which brings us to the final point, the one that matters most. Conclusion: small moments decide big outcomes. Most police encounters do not change because of one dramatic moment. They change because of tiny behavioral decisions. The first reach toward the console, the first interruption, the first aggressive tone shift, the first refusal to comply physically. Small moments, that's what changes outcomes. And when people understand legal rights incorrectly, they often create escalation unintentionally, not because they're guilty, because stress changes behavior. This is why awareness matters, not confrontation, not internet bravado, controlled awareness. Understanding that traffic stops are sequences, not debates. Understanding that body cam footage tells a story later. Understanding that silence without composure can still appear suspicious. And understanding that lawful rights work best when paired with lawful behavior. Because courts analyze more than words. They analyze timing, movement, perception, compliance, escalation. That's the real framework. And once you understand that framework, you begin seeing traffic stops differently, not emotionally, structurally, because the goal is not to beat officers roadside. The goal is to avoid unnecessary escalation while preserving your legal position intelligently. And often, the people who handle encounters best are not the loudest people. They're the most controlled, because small moments decide big outcomes. If you want more real-world breakdowns on traffic stops, criminal procedure, body cam interpretation, and police encounter analysis explained from a legal perspective, subscribe to the channel. Stay aware, stay controlled, and remember, the law often analyzes behavior long before it analyzes intent.